The desert wind carried dust and the smell of diesel fuel across the forward operating base. Sergeant Maria Santos adjusted her medical pack one more time, checking that every bandage, every vial of morphine, every piece of life-saving equipment was exactly where it should be. At 26, she had been a combat medic for 4 years, but this mission felt different. The intelligence reports were sketchy. The enemy activity in the area had increased, and worst of all, they were going in with a smaller team than usual. "Santos, you ready?" Commander Jake Morrison called out from beside their armored vehicle. At 32, Morrison had the kind of steady presence that made soldiers feel safe. Even in the worst situations, his weathered face showed the marks of too many deployments, but his eyes still held the sharp focus that had kept his men alive through countless operations. Maria nodded, slinging her pack over her shoulders. The weight felt familiar now, like an extension of her own body. Inside were supplies that could mean the difference between a soldier going home to his family or coming back in a flag-draped box. She never took that responsibility lightly. The rest of the squad gathered around Morrison for the final briefing. There was Corporal Williams, barely 21 but already a veteran of 2 deployments. His hands shook slightly as he checked his rifle. Not from fear but from the energy that always built up before a mission. Next to him stood Sergeant Thompson, the squad's heavy weapons specialist, a mountain of a man who could carry more ammunition than seemed humanly possible. Private Chen was the youngest member of their team, fresh out of training but eager to prove himself. Maria had already taken him aside twice to remind him about proper communication procedures and staying with the group. In her experience, it was always the new ones who got into trouble. Not from cowardice, but from trying too hard to be heroes. "Listen up," Morrison began, his voice cutting through the morning air. "We've got reports of enemy activity in Sector 7. Intelligence suggests they're moving weapons through that area, using the old irrigation tunnels to stay hidden. Our job is to get in, confirm the reports, and gather intel on their supply routes." He pointed to a map spread across the hood of their vehicle. The terrain looked challenging, rocky hills dotted with abandoned buildings, perfect for ambushes. Maria studied the medical evacuation routes, automatically calculating distances and times. If someone got hit, how long would it take to get them to safety? Where were the best locations for setting up a casualty collection point? "The good news," Morrison continued, "is that we're not going in alone. Bravo team will be providing overwatch from the ridgeline here." He tapped a spot on the map about 2 kilometers from their target area. "Charlie team will be our extraction support, positioned at the main road junction." Williams raised his hand. "Sir, what's the latest on enemy strength in that area?" Morrison's expression grew serious. "That's the problem. Intelligence is limited. Could be a small group moving supplies. Could be something bigger. We go in assuming the worst, hope for the best." Maria felt the familiar knot form in her stomach. Uncertainty was always the enemy's greatest weapon. In the medical field, you could prepare for known injuries, stock up on specific supplies, train for particular scenarios, but in combat, the unknown could kill you faster than any bullet. "Time of departure is 0800 hours, Morrison announced. "Equipment check in 30 minutes. Any questions?" The team dispersed to make final preparations. Maria returned to her quarters to review her medical supplies one more time. She had learned early in her career that preparation could make the difference between saving a life and losing one. Her fingers moved automatically through the contents of her pack: tourniquets, pressure bandages, airway tubes, pain medication, antibiotics. She paused at a small photograph tucked into a side pocket. It showed her younger brother Danny, in his high school graduation gown, smiling widely at the camera. He had been planning to enlist after college, following in her footsteps. The photo was taken just 2 weeks before the car accident that ended those dreams. Maria carried it as a reminder of why she did this job, to make sure other families didn't have to endure what hers had. A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in." Morrison entered, looking more tired than usual. "How are you feeling about this one, Santos?" Maria had served under Morrison for 8 months now, and she had learned to read the subtle signs of his concern. When he used first names in private conversations, it usually meant he was worried about something he couldn't share with the rest of the team. Honestly, sir, something feels off about this mission. The intelligence is too vague, and we're going in with minimal support. Morrison nodded slowly. I've got the same feeling. But sometimes that's just the job. We work with what we have. Is there something specific you're concerned about? Maria asked. He was quiet for a moment, studying the floor. I've been doing this for 12 years, Santos. I've learned to trust my instincts. And right now they're telling me we might be walking into something bigger than we're prepared for. Then why are we going? Because that's what soldiers do. We go where we're needed, even when we don't have all the answers. He looked up at her. But I want you to know that if things go bad out there, your job is to keep the team alive. Whatever it takes. Maria understood the weight of what he was saying. In combat situations, medics were supposed to focus on treating the wounded, not engaging the enemy. But she had heard stories of medics who had been forced to pick up weapons when their squads were overrun. It was a line she hoped she would never have to cross. I'll do whatever the situation requires, sir. Morrison smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I know you will. That's why I trust you. I know you will. After he left, Maria finished her preparations and joined the team at their vehicle. The armored truck was loaded with enough supplies for a 3-day mission. Though they expected to be back by nightfall, Thompson was doing a final check of the heavy machine gun mounted on top, while Williams and Chen loaded additional ammunition. The ride to their insertion point took 45 minutes through increasingly rough terrain. Maria used the time to review medical procedures in her mind, running through different scenarios and the appropriate responses. Gunshot wound to the chest. Seal the wound. Monitor breathing. Prepare for possible needle decompression. Severe bleeding from an extremity. Apply direct pressure. Consider tourniquet placement. Treat for shock. She had practiced these procedures hundreds of times in training, but real combat was different. In training, the casualties were actors with fake blood and predictable injuries. In real combat, soldiers screamed in pain, begged for their mothers, and sometimes died despite your best efforts. The vehicle came to a stop at the edge of a rocky valley. Morrison checked his radio one final time, confirming communications with their support teams. Bravo team, this is Alpha Leader. Radio check. Alpha Leader, this is Bravo. We have you 5x5 and good eyes on your position. Charlie team, Alpha Leader. Status report. Alpha Leader. Charlie team standing by at extraction point. All clear on our end. Morrison shouldered his rifle and looked at his team. Remember, we're here to gather intelligence, not to fight a war. We go in quiet, get what we need, and get out. Stay alert, stay together, and watch each other's backs. They moved out in tactical formation, Morrison taking point with Williams close behind. Thompson carried his heavy weapon with practiced ease, scanning the high ground for threats. Chen stayed close to the center of the formation, and Maria brought up the rear, her medical training making her naturally protective of the team's flanks. The terrain was even more challenging than the map had suggested. Loose rocks shifted under their feet, and the abandoned buildings provided countless hiding spots for potential enemies. Maria found herself constantly checking their 6 o'clock position, making sure they weren't being followed. After an hour of careful movement, they reached the edge of their target area. Morrison called for a halt and pulled out his binoculars. The old irrigation tunnels were visible about 300 meters ahead, dark openings in the hillside that could hide any number of threats. I count at least 4 tunnel entrances, Morrison whispered into his radio. No visual on enemy activity, but there's fresh vehicle tracks leading to the main tunnel. Maria studied the area through her own scope. The tracks looked recent, probably made within the last 24 hours. Whatever was happening here, they might be walking into an active operation. Morrison made his decision. We're going to move closer for a better look. Santos, I want you to set up an overwatch position here with Thompson, Williams, and Chen. You're with me. Maria wanted to protest. Standard procedure called for the medic to stay with the main element. not split off with the heavy weapons specialist. But she could see the tactical logic in Morrison's plan. If the main group ran into trouble, she would be in position to provide covering fire, while Thompson laid down suppressive fire. "Roger that, sir," she replied, settling into position behind a large boulder that provided good cover and a clear view of the target area. Thompson set up his machine gun about 20 meters to her left, creating overlapping fields of fire. His calm demeanor was reassuring. Even in this tense situation, Maria had seen him in action before and knew he was one of the most reliable soldiers in their unit. Through her scope, Maria watched Morrison's team move carefully toward the tunnel entrances. They used proper bounding techniques, one person moving while the others provided cover. Everything was going according to plan. That's when she noticed the glint of metal from a building they had cleared earlier. Her blood ran cold as she realized what she was seeing. Someone was in that building. Someone who hadn't been there during their initial sweep. The angle suggested a sniper position with a clear view of Morrison's approaching team. Maria grabbed her radio. "Alpha Leader, this is Santos. You've got a possible sniper in the building at your 8 o'clock, approximately 200 meters. Morrison's voice came back immediately. "Confirm sniper position, Santos." Maria adjusted her scope, trying to get a clearer view. The glint was still there, and now she could make out the outline of a rifle barrel. "Confirmed. Sniper in the second-floor window of the damaged building. He's got a clear shot on your position. Roger. Thompson, can you engage?" Thompson's voice was steady as always. "Negative. Angle is wrong from my position. I can't get a clear shot." Maria felt her heart rate increase. The sniper was in position to devastate Morrison's team, and they didn't have a way to neutralize the threat from their current positions. She could see Morrison's team taking cover, but the sniper's elevated position gave him multiple angles of attack. "Alpha Leader," Maria called. "I've got a clear shot from my position." There was a pause before Morrison responded. "Santos, you're a medic. That's not your job." "Sir, I'm also a soldier, and right now, we need to neutralize that threat." Maria had qualified expert marksman in basic training and had maintained her rifle skills through regular practice. She might be a medic first, but every soldier was trained to fight when necessary. The sniper was moving now, adjusting his position to get a better angle on Morrison's team. In a few seconds, he would have a clear shot at her commander and friends. Maria made her decision. She steadied her rifle against the rock, controlled her breathing, and placed the crosshair's center mass on the barely visible figure in the window. At this distance, with these conditions, it was a difficult shot but not impossible. The crack of her rifle echoed across the valley. Through her scope, she saw the sniper jerk backward and disappear from the window. Whether she had hit him or simply forced him to take cover, the immediate threat to Morrison's team was neutralized. "Target neutralized," she reported. "Good shooting, Santos. Thompson, maintain overwatch. We're continuing to the objective." But Maria's shot had attracted attention. As Morrison's team approached the tunnel entrances, figures began emerging from the underground passages. Not just a few people moving supplies, but a significant force armed with military weapons. "Alpha Leader, you've got multiple enemies emerging from the tunnels. Count at least 12 individuals with automatic weapons." Morrison's voice remained calm despite the deteriorating situation. "We see them. This is bigger than intelligence suggested." The enemy forces were spreading out, trying to surround Morrison's small team. Maria could see the tactical situation developing and knew her friends were in serious trouble. They were outnumbered at least 3-1, and the enemy had the advantage of fighting on familiar ground. Thompson opened up with his machine gun, the steady rhythm of automatic fire echoing across the hills. His accurate shooting forced several enemy fighters to take cover, but there were too many of them spread across too wide an area. "Bravo team, this is Alpha Leader," Morrison called on the radio. "We need immediate fire support on our position." "Alpha Leader, Bravo team. We're engaging targets on the ridgeline. Multiple enemy positions between us and you." Maria felt the situation slipping away from them. Not only was Morrison's team surrounded, but their Overwatch support was dealing with their own problems. This wasn't the small supply operation they had been expecting. This was a major enemy stronghold. Through her scope, she watched Morrison's team fighting for their lives, moving from cover to cover as enemy fire intensified around them. Chen was staying close to Williams, following his lead, while Morrison coordinated their defensive positions. That's when Maria saw the enemy fighter with the rocket-propelled grenade launcher. He was setting up in a position that would give him a clear shot at the building where Morrison's team had taken cover. If he got that shot off, the mission would be over and her friends would be dead. Maria shifted her aim to the new threat. But the distance was even greater than her shot at the sniper. She would have to account for wind drift, bullet drop, and the movement of her target. It was the kind of shot that required perfect conditions and a little bit of luck. She steadied her breathing, adjusted for the distance, and slowly squeezed the trigger. The enemy fighter spun around and dropped the weapon, clutching his shoulder. Not a perfect shot, but enough to remove the immediate threat to her team. RPG threat neutralized, she reported, but more enemy fighters were appearing from the tunnels, and Maria realized they had walked into a trap. Someone had fed them false intelligence, drawing them into an area where a large enemy force was waiting. Thompson's machine gun continued its steady fire, but Maria could see enemy fighters maneuvering to flank their position. Soon they would be overrun, and then Morrison's team would have no fire support at all. "Thompson," she called. "We need to displace. They're moving to surround us." The big sergeant fired another burst before responding. "Roger. On my mark." We bound back to secondary position. But as they prepared to move, Maria heard something that made her blood freeze, the distinctive whistle of an incoming mortar round. "Incoming!" she shouted, pressing herself against the ground as the explosion erupted 50 meters away, showering them with rocks and debris. The enemy had called in indirect fire support. What had started as a reconnaissance mission was turning into a full-scale battle, and Maria's team was outnumbered, outgunned, and running out of time. The mortar explosions were getting closer. Maria pressed herself against the rocky ground as shrapnel whistled overhead. Feeling the heat of the explosion wash over her position, Thompson's machine gun had gone silent, and when she looked over, she saw him clutching his arm where a piece of metal had torn through his sleeve. "Thompson, you hit?" she called out. "Just a scratch," he replied, but Maria could see blood seeping through his fingers. In her medical training, she had learned that soldiers always said, "just a scratch," even when they were seriously injured. It was part of the warrior mentality that kept them fighting when everything went wrong. Another mortar round landed even closer. This one, only 30 meters away. The enemy had their position figured out and were adjusting their fire. Soon they would have the range perfect, and there would be nowhere to hide. "Santos, Thompson, we need to pull back to the rally point." Morrison's voice crackled over the radio, but Maria could hear the strain in his voice, the kind of tension that meant things were going very badly for his team too. "Roger, Alpha Leader. Thompson's wounded. We're moving to secondary position." Maria grabbed Thompson's arm to help him up, feeling the wetness of blood through his uniform. The wound was deeper than he was admitting, but they didn't have time for proper first aid, not with mortar rounds dropping around them and enemy fighters closing in. They bounded back from rock to rock, Thompson carrying his heavy weapon despite his injury. Maria stayed close to him, ready to provide medical aid if he collapsed. Behind them, she could hear automatic weapons fire getting closer as the enemy advanced on their previous position. The secondary position was a cluster of boulders about 200 meters back from their original spot. It provided good cover but gave them a more limited view of the battlefield. As soon as they reached it, Maria started working on Thompson's arm. "Let me see that wound," she said, pulling out her medical kit. Thompson grimaced as she cut away his sleeve. The shrapnel had gouged a deep cut along his forearm, missing the major arteries but still bleeding heavily. Maria quickly applied pressure bandages and gave him a shot of morphine for the pain. "Can you still operate your weapon?" she asked. Thompson flexed his fingers and nodded. "Yeah, I can fight. But my accuracy might be off." From their new position, Maria could see Morrison's team still pinned down near the tunnel entrances. The enemy had them surrounded on 3 sides, and their ammunition had to be running low. Worse, she could see more enemy fighters emerging from the tunnels, carrying heavier weapons. "Bravo team. This is Alpha Leader," Morrison called on the radio. "What's your status?" The response was not encouraging. "Alpha Leader, Bravo Team. We're taking heavy fire from multiple positions. We've got casualties and need immediate medical assistance." Maria felt her heart sink. Their Overwatch support was knocked out. Thompson was wounded, and Morrison's team was surrounded. The mission had turned into a disaster. But they were too deep in enemy territory to simply withdraw. "Charlie Team, Alpha Leader. We need immediate extraction support." "Alpha Leader, Charlie Team. We're under attack at the extraction point. Multiple vehicles approaching our position. We might not be able to maintain the pickup zone." That was it. Their extraction support was gone too. Maria realized they were completely on their own, surrounded by an enemy force that had obviously been waiting for them. Someone had set them up, feeding them false intelligence to draw them into this trap. Through her scope, she watched Morrison's team trying to fight their way out of the encirclement. Williams was providing covering fire, while Chen and Morrison moved between positions. But there were too many enemies, and they were running out of places to hide. Then she saw the explosion. A rocket-propelled grenade struck the building where Morrison had been taking cover. The blast was enormous, sending debris flying in all directions. Maria's scope filled with smoke and dust, and for several terrifying seconds, she couldn't see anything. "Alpha Leader, this is Santos. Report your status." Silence. "Alpha Leader, please respond." Still nothing. Maria felt panic rising in her throat. These men weren't just her teammates. They were her friends. Morrison had been like an older brother to her, always watching out for his people, always putting the mission and his soldiers before himself. Williams had a wife and 2 young children back home. Chen was just a kid, barely out of high school. Finally, Williams' voice came over the radio, strained and desperate. "Santos. Alpha Leader is down. He's hurt bad. We need immediate medical assistance. What's your position?" "Southeast corner of the main building. We're trapped. Enemy fighters on all sides." Maria looked at Thompson, who was setting up his machine gun despite his wounded arm. The distance to Morrison's position was at least 300 meters across open ground, all of it covered by enemy fire. It would be suicide to try to reach them, but that was her job. She was a medic. When soldiers were wounded, she went to them, no matter how dangerous the situation. "Thompson, I need to get to the commander." Thompson looked at her like she was crazy. "Santos, that's a death run. You'll never make it across that open ground." "Maybe not, but I have to try." She started stripping unnecessary equipment from her gear, keeping only her medical supplies and her rifle. Every ounce mattered when you were running through enemy fire. "At least let me provide covering fire," Thompson said. "I'll keep their heads down while you move." Maria nodded, checking her medical pack one more time. She had morphine, pressure bandages, airway tubes, and everything else she might need to keep Morrison alive long enough to get him to safety. But first, she had to reach him. "On my mark," Thompson said, taking aim with his machine gun. Maria took a deep breath, said a quick prayer, and prepared to run for her life. "Mark." Thompson opened up with sustained fire, the machine gun chattering as he swept the enemy positions. Maria sprinted from cover, running in a zigzag pattern to make herself a harder target. Bullets cracked past her head, kicking up dirt around her feet. She dove behind a broken wall as automatic weapons fire erupted from multiple positions. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst, but she was still alive. About halfway to Morrison's position, Thompson's covering fire shifted to a new target, giving her another opportunity to move. She sprinted again, this time toward a disabled vehicle that would provide better cover. More bullets whined past her. One so close she felt the heat of its passage. Behind the vehicle, she paused to catch her breath and assess the situation. She could hear Morrison's team firing from the building ahead, but their rate of fire was slowing down. They were either running out of ammunition or running out of people who could shoot. "Williams, this is Santos. I'm about 50 meters out. What's the commander's condition?" "He took shrapnel to the chest and left leg. He's conscious but losing blood fast." Maria felt a mixture of relief and urgency. Morrison was alive, but chest wounds could be fatal quickly, if not treated properly. She needed to reach him soon. Thompson's machine gun fell silent, probably because he was changing ammunition belts. This gave the enemy a chance to advance, and Maria could see fighters moving closer to Morrison's position. She made her final sprint, covering the last 50 meters in a desperate dash that brought her through the building's back entrance, just as enemy fire erupted from the front. Inside, she found a scene of controlled chaos. Williams was firing through a window while Chen bandaged his own leg wound. Morrison was propped against a wall, his face pale, but his eyes alert. "About time you got here, Santos," Morrison said with a weak smile. "I was starting to think you didn't care about me anymore." Even wounded and surrounded, he was trying to keep morale up. That was Morrison, always thinking about his people first. Maria immediately went to work, cutting away his uniform to assess the wounds. The shrapnel had penetrated his chest about 2 inches below his left shoulder, missing his heart but potentially hitting a lung. His left thigh had a deep gash that was bleeding heavily, but hadn't hit the major artery. "How's the breathing, sir?" she asked, checking for signs of a collapsed lung. "Hurts like hell, but I can breathe okay." Maria worked quickly, sealing the chest wound and applying pressure bandages to his leg. She gave him morphine for the pain and started an IV to replace fluids he had lost. "Can you move?" she asked. Morrison tried to stand but immediately sat back down. "Leg won't hold my weight." That complicated everything. Maria had hoped to get Morrison mobile enough to move under his own power, but his wounds were too severe. She would have to carry him, and that would make their escape much more difficult. "Williams," she called. "What's our ammunition status?" "Down to our last magazines. Maybe 10 minutes of fire if we're careful." Chen limped over, favoring his wounded leg. "Santos, there's a back way out through the basement. It leads to some kind of drainage tunnel." Maria considered their options. They could stay here and fight until their ammunition ran out, but that would just delay the inevitable. Or they could try to move Morrison through the drainage tunnel and hope it led to a safer position. Where does the tunnel go? Don't know, but it heads away from the main enemy positions. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was better than sitting here waiting to die. "All right. Williams, Chen, gather what ammunition you have left. We're moving the commander." Maria rigged a field stretcher using Morrison's rifle and 2 broken boards from the damaged building. It wasn't comfortable, but it would allow her to drag him if necessary. "Sir, this is going to hurt," she warned Morrison as they lifted him onto the makeshift stretcher. "Just get us out of here, Santos. I trust you." Those words hit her harder than she expected. Morrison trusted her not just to treat his wounds, but to get the entire team to safety. That was a responsibility she had never carried before. They made their way to the basement, Williams leading and Chen covering their rear. The drainage tunnel was narrow and dark, barely wide enough for the stretcher. Maria had to crawl behind Morrison, pulling him along while Williams pushed from behind. The tunnel seemed to go on forever. Maria's arms ached from dragging Morrison's weight, and her knees were raw from crawling over rough concrete. Behind them, she could hear enemy voices echoing through the building they had just left. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, they emerged from a drainage outlet, about 500 meters from the main battle area. They were in a small ravine that provided concealment from the enemy positions. Morrison was barely conscious from the morphine and blood loss. His breathing was becoming more labored, and Maria realized the chest wound was worse than she had initially thought. "Williams," she said quietly, "I need to operate on the commander. That chest wound is causing internal bleeding." Williams looked at her in surprise. "Santos, you're a combat medic, not a surgeon." "I know. But if I don't try, he's going to die." Maria had received advanced medical training that included some field surgery techniques, but she had never actually operated on a human being under combat conditions. Still, Morrison's vital signs were declining, and they were too far from proper medical facilities to get him help in time. She set up her medical equipment in the narrow ravine, using a flashlight to provide illumination. Williams and Chen kept watch, while she prepared to save their commander's life. The surgery was a nightmare. Working by flashlight, with limited equipment, while enemy forces searched for them in the distance. Maria had to open Morrison's chest wound further to locate the source of bleeding, a task that required steady hands and precise movements. Morrison remained unconscious throughout the procedure, which was probably a blessing. Maria found the bleeding vessel and managed to clamp it off, then carefully cleaned and closed the wound. It wasn't textbook surgery, but it would keep him alive. As she finished the last sutures, Williams grabbed her arm. "Santos, we've got movement coming this way. Looks like a patrol." Maria looked up from her patient to see flashlight beams moving through the darkness about 200 meters away. The enemy was conducting a systematic search, and they would find the drainage outlet eventually. "Can the commander be moved?" Williams asked. Maria checked Morrison's vital signs. His pulse was stronger now that she had stopped the internal bleeding, but he was still in critical condition. Moving him too much could reopen the wounds. He shouldn't be moved, but we don't have a choice. They rigged the stretcher again and began moving through the ravine, trying to put distance between themselves and the searching enemy patrol. Morrison drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally mumbling orders or asking about his men. After an hour of careful movement, they found an abandoned farm building that provided better cover. Maria set up a proper aid station and continued treating Morrison's wounds while Williams tried to re-establish radio contact with their support teams. "Any luck with communications?" Maria asked. Williams shook his head. "Nothing. Either their radios are down, or they're all dead." Chen was manning the lookout post, scanning the surrounding area for signs of enemy movement. Despite his own leg wound, he had performed well under pressure, following orders and staying calm in a chaotic situation. Maria checked Morrison's condition again. His breathing was steady, and the bleeding had stopped, but he needed proper medical treatment soon. They were maybe buying him hours, not days. "Sir," she said softly. "Can you hear me?" Morrison's eyes opened slowly. "Santos? Where are we?" "About 2 kilometers from the original target area. You've been wounded, but you're stable." Morrison tried to sit up but immediately grimaced in pain. "The mission. Did we complete the objective?" Maria realized that even wounded and fighting for his life, Morrison was still thinking about the mission. They had been sent to gather intelligence on enemy supply routes, but they had discovered something much bigger. A major enemy stronghold that posed a serious threat to friendly forces. "Sir, we need to focus on getting you evacuated." "No." Morrison's voice was stronger now, driven by determination. "We discovered a major enemy position. That intelligence has to get back to headquarters. Commander, you're in no condition to continue the mission." Morrison looked at her with those steady eyes that had led men through countless dangerous situations. "Then you'll have to complete it for me." Maria felt the weight of command settling on her shoulders. She was a medic, trained to save lives, not to lead combat missions. But Williams and Chen were looking at her expectantly, waiting for orders. "What exactly are you asking me to do, sir?" Morrison struggled to reach into his vest pocket and pulled out a small digital camera. "This contains photos of the enemy positions, their equipment, and the tunnel system. Headquarters needs this intelligence to plan a proper response. We can send it when we re-establish radio contact. No guarantee that will happen. Someone needs to get this back to base personally." Maria understood what he was really asking. Someone needed to leave him here and make the dangerous journey back to friendly lines, carrying intelligence that could save lives in future operations. "Sir, I'm not leaving you. Santos, listen to me. If you stay here, we all die when the enemy finds us. If you go back with this intelligence, you might save hundreds of lives." Williams spoke up. "Commander, I should be the one to go. Santos is the medic." Morrison shook his head. "Williams, I need you and Chen to stay with me. Santos is the best shot, and she's proved she can think under pressure. She's our best chance of getting through." Maria looked at the camera, then at Morrison's pale face. Every instinct she had as a medic told her to stay with her patient. But every instinct she had as a soldier told her that the mission came first. "How far to the nearest friendly position?" she asked. Morrison pulled out his map with shaking hands. "About 15 kilometers. There's a checkpoint here that should have radio contact with headquarters. 15 kilometers through enemy-controlled territory, alone, carrying vital intelligence. Maria had never undertaken a solo mission of this magnitude, but she understood the stakes. Morrison reached for his rifle, the weapon that had been his constant companion through 3 deployments. "Take this. You'll need more firepower than your sidearm." Maria stared at the rifle. Taking it would mean accepting the mission, leaving her wounded commander, and transforming from medic to combat soldier. "Sir, what if you need medical attention while I'm gone? Williams knows basic first aid, and Chen can help him if needed." Morrison pressed the camera and rifle into her hands. "Santos, I've been a soldier for 12 years. I've never asked anyone to do something I wouldn't do myself. But this mission is bigger than any of us." Maria realized he was right. They had stumbled onto something that could threaten every American soldier in the region. Getting that intelligence back to headquarters was more important than any single life, even Morrison's. "All right, sir, I'll do it." Morrison smiled, the first genuine smile she had seen from him since the mission began. "I knew I could count on you." Maria gathered her essential gear, keeping only her sidearm, medical supplies, water, and Morrison's rifle. Everything else would just slow her down. "Williams, if the commander takes a turn for the worse, you do whatever it takes to keep him alive." "Roger that, Santos." She looked at Chen, who despite being the youngest member of the team had proven himself under fire. "Chen, watch the perimeter. If you see anything suspicious, don't hesitate to wake Williams." "Yes, ma'am." Maria paused at the door of the farmhouse. Once she left, she would be completely on her own in enemy territory. No backup, no support. Just her training and Morrison's rifle. "Santos," Morrison called softly, "bring my boys home." "Yes, sir, I will." Maria stepped out into the darkness, Morrison's rifle in her hands, and the weight of the mission on her shoulders. Behind her, she left her wounded commander and 2 soldiers who were counting on her to complete the objective. Ahead of her lay 15 kilometers of enemy territory and a mission that would test every skill she had learned as both a medic and a soldier. The night air was cold against Maria's face as she moved through the rocky terrain, Morrison's rifle feeling heavier in her hands with each passing hour. She had been traveling for 3 hours now, covering about 5 kilometers according to her map. 10 more kilometers to the checkpoint. 10 more kilometers carrying intelligence that could save countless lives. Every shadow could hide an enemy fighter. Every sound could signal an ambush. Maria found herself constantly checking her 6 o'clock position, remembering her training about solo operations in hostile territory. Trust no one, assume every position is compromised, and always have an escape route planned. The digital camera containing the photos of the enemy stronghold was secured in a waterproof pouch in her vest pocket. She could feel it against her chest with every step. A constant reminder of the responsibility Morrison had placed on her shoulders. Those images showed tunnel systems, weapons positions, and troop concentrations that intelligence analysts would need to plan a proper response. Maria paused at the crest of a small hill to check her position. According to her GPS, she was making good time, but the terrain ahead looked more challenging. The route to the checkpoint led through a narrow valley that would be perfect for an ambush. But it was also the most direct path to safety. She decided to take a longer route along the ridgeline. It would add 2 hours to her journey, but it would keep her away from the obvious routes that enemy patrols might be watching. As she adjusted her course, Maria heard the distant sound of vehicles in the valley below. Through her scope, she could see headlights moving along the road, 3 trucks headed in the direction she had just come from, reinforcements heading to search for Morrison's team. Maria felt a stab of worry about the men she had left behind. Williams and Chen were good soldiers, but they were outnumbered and low on ammunition. Morrison's condition was stable when she left, but chest wounds could deteriorate quickly without proper medical care. She forced herself to focus on the mission. The sooner she delivered the intelligence, the sooner rescue forces could be dispatched to extract her team. The ridgeline route was treacherous in the darkness. Loose rocks shifted under her feet, and several times, she had to catch herself from falling into ravines that appeared suddenly out of the shadows. But it kept her away from enemy forces. And after 2 more hours of careful movement, she reached a position overlooking her next waypoint. The abandoned village of Caraba lay spread out below her, dark buildings clustered around what had once been a busy marketplace. According to her map, the checkpoint was just 5 kilometers beyond the village, but she would have to cross through the settlement to maintain her timeline. Through her scope, Maria studied the village for signs of enemy activity. Most of the buildings appeared empty, their windows dark and their doorways gaping like empty eye sockets, but experience had taught her that appearances could be deceiving in combat zones. She was about to begin her descent when she spotted movement near the village center. A figure was moving between buildings, carrying what looked like an automatic weapon. Then she saw another figure. And another. The village wasn't as abandoned as it appeared. Maria counted at least 6 enemy fighters positioned throughout the settlement. They weren't conducting an active patrol, which suggested they might be part of a permanent security force for the area. Either way, they stood between her and her objective. She considered her options. She could try to circle around the village, but that would add several hours to her journey and put her dangerously close to dawn. Traveling in daylight would make her much more vulnerable to detection. Alternatively, she could try to move through the village quietly, avoiding contact with the enemy forces. It was risky, but it was also the fastest route to the checkpoint. Maria made her decision. She would infiltrate the village, relying on stealth and her medical training to avoid detection. If things went wrong, Morrison's rifle would have to be enough to fight her way out. She spent 20 minutes studying the enemy positions, noting their patrol routes and timing. The fighters seemed relaxed, probably not expecting any American forces to be operating in the area. That would work in her favor. Maria descended into the village, moving from shadow to shadow with careful precision. Her medical training had taught her to move quietly in hospital environments, and those skills translated well to urban infiltration. Every step was deliberate, every movement calculated to avoid detection. She reached the first building without incident, pressing herself against the wall, while an enemy fighter walked past just 20 meters away. The man was smoking a cigarette, the glowing tip providing a beacon in the darkness. He seemed bored, not alert, which suggested the enemy forces didn't consider this area to be under immediate threat. Maria waited for the patrol to pass, then continued deeper into the village. She was halfway through when she encountered her first real problem. 2 enemy fighters had taken position near what appeared to be a command post, complete with radio equipment and maps spread across a table. They were having an animated conversation in a language Maria didn't understand, but their gestures toward the hills suggested they were discussing the search for Morrison's team. The command post was directly in her path to the village exit. She could try to circle around it, but that would take her through an area with no cover and high visibility. Or she could try to eliminate the 2 guards quietly, but that would leave evidence of her passage and might compromise the rescue operation. Maria studied the situation for several minutes before noticing a third option. There was a drainage ditch that ran behind the command post, probably used to channel rainwater during the wet season. If she could reach it without being seen, she could crawl past the enemy position. The approach to the drainage ditch required crossing 15 meters of open ground. Maria waited for the guards to become distracted by their conversation, then sprinted across the exposed area and dove into the ditch. The drainage channel was filled with mud and debris, but it provided excellent concealment. Maria crawled through the filthy water, keeping her rifle above the waterline to prevent damage to its mechanisms. The smell was terrible, but it was better than being detected by enemy forces. She emerged from the ditch about 50 meters past the command post, covered in mud but undetected. The village exit was just ahead, a gap between 2 collapsed buildings that led to open ground beyond. Maria was almost clear when she heard voices behind her. Someone had discovered her tracks in the mud near the drainage ditch entrance. Flashlight beams began sweeping the area, and she could hear excited voices calling out in the enemy language. She had been compromised. Within minutes, the entire enemy force in the village would be searching for her. Maria abandoned stealth and ran for the village exit, hoping to reach open ground before the search teams could organize. Behind her, automatic weapons fire erupted as enemy fighters spotted her movement. Bullets cracked past her head and sparked off the stone buildings around her. Maria zigzagged between the ruins, using every piece of cover available as she fought her way towards safety. She reached the village exit just as an enemy fighter appeared in the gap between buildings, blocking her escape route. The man raised his rifle, and Maria knew she had no choice. She brought Morrison's rifle to her shoulder and fired. The enemy fighter spun around and dropped to the ground. Maria felt a mixture of satisfaction and revulsion. Satisfaction at eliminating a threat, revulsion at taking a human life. She had never killed anyone before, despite all her combat training, but there was no time to process the emotional impact of her actions. More enemy fighters were converging on her position, and she needed to reach open ground where her marksmanship skills would give her an advantage. Maria sprinted out of the village and up a small hill that provided elevation and cover. Behind her, the enemy forces were organizing a pursuit, but they would have to expose themselves to follow her into the open terrain. She took position behind a cluster of rocks and waited for the enemy forces to emerge from the village. When they did, moving in a loose skirmish line, Maria began engaging them with precise rifle fire. Her first shot dropped the lead pursuer at about 200 meters. The others immediately took cover. But Maria had the advantage of elevation and better training. She continued picking off targets as they tried to advance, forcing the enemy force to halt their pursuit. After 10 minutes of long-range firefight, the enemy fighters began withdrawing back to the village. They had lost at least 3 men and couldn't locate Maria's exact position in the darkness. The pursuit was over, for now. Maria checked her ammunition. She had used most of 1 magazine in the firefight, leaving her with 2 full magazines and whatever rounds remained in her current one. Not a lot of firepower if she encountered another enemy force, but hopefully enough to reach the checkpoint. She continued her journey, moving faster now that dawn was approaching. The checkpoint was still 3 kilometers away, and she needed to reach it before full daylight made her visible to enemy aircraft or long-range observers. The terrain became more difficult as she approached the checkpoint area. Rocky hills gave way to sandy desert, offering less cover but allowing faster movement. Maria pushed herself harder, knowing that every minute counted for both the intelligence mission and the survival of her team. As the sun began to rise over the horizon, Maria spotted the checkpoint in the distance. It was a small outpost built around what had once been a gas station, with concrete barriers and observation towers providing protection for the soldiers stationed there. But something was wrong. There was no movement around the checkpoint, no guards visible in the towers. The place looked abandoned. Maria approached carefully, using her scope to scan the position for signs of life. The gates were open, vehicles were missing, and she could see damage to some of the buildings that suggested recent fighting. When she reached the checkpoint perimeter, she found her worst fears confirmed. The position had been overrun, probably within the last 24 hours. Dead American soldiers lay around the defensive positions, and the radio equipment had been destroyed or removed. Maria felt despair washing over her. She had traveled 15 kilometers through enemy territory, carrying vital intelligence, only to find that her destination no longer existed. The mission was a failure, and Morrison's team was still trapped behind enemy lines. But as she searched through the damaged checkpoint, Maria found something that renewed her hope. One of the communication buildings had been missed by the enemy forces, and it contained a backup radio system that appeared to be intact. Maria quickly set up the radio equipment, hoping that someone was monitoring the emergency frequencies. She had to try multiple frequencies before she finally heard a familiar voice. Unknown station. This is Falcon Base. Identify yourself. Falcon Base, this is Sergeant Santos, Alpha Team. I have priority intelligence and need immediate assistance. There was a pause before the response came. Santos, this is Colonel Martinez. We've been looking for your team for 18 hours. What's your status? Maria quickly briefed the colonel on their situation. Morrison's wounds, the discovery of the enemy stronghold, and the intelligence she was carrying. She also reported the overrun checkpoint and requested immediate medical evacuation for her commander. Santos, that intelligence is exactly what we need. We've been tracking increased enemy activity in your sector, but we didn't know the scope of their operation. Sir, can you extract my team? Negative on immediate extraction. We don't have assets available for a rescue mission in that area right now. But we can get you out from your current position." Maria felt her heart sink. They could rescue her. But Morrison, Williams, and Chen would be left behind enemy lines with no medical support and dwindling ammunition. "Sir, I'm not leaving without my team." "Santos, that's an order. Your intelligence is too valuable to risk losing." Maria stared at the radio, thinking about Morrison's trust in her, William's wife and children back home, and Chen's youth and inexperience. They were counting on her to bring help, not to abandon them. "Colonel, with respect, I have a better idea." She outlined her plan quickly. The intelligence photos showed the exact layout of the enemy stronghold, including weak points in their defenses. If they could organize a quick strike mission using that intelligence, they could hit the enemy force while simultaneously extracting Morrison's team. "Santos, you're a medic, not a tactical planner." "Sir, I'm also the only person who has seen that enemy position firsthand. I know how to get in and out." There was a long pause before Colonel Martinez responded. "All right, Santos. But you'll be guiding the rescue force, not just providing intelligence." Within 2 hours, Maria heard the distinctive sound of approaching helicopters. A rescue force consisting of 2 Apache attack helicopters and 1 medical evacuation helicopter was approaching her position, guided by the GPS coordinates she had provided. The lead helicopter landed near the checkpoint, and Maria ran toward it, with Morrison's rifle still in her hands. The crew chief helped her aboard, and she immediately began briefing the mission commander on the enemy positions and the route to Morrison's team. "The main enemy force is concentrated around the tunnel complex here," she explained, pointing to the map. "But my team is held up in this farmhouse, about 2 kilometers away. If we hit the main force first, it will draw their attention away from my people." The Apache helicopters struck the enemy stronghold with precision-guided missiles, using the intelligence Maria had gathered to target key positions. While the enemy forces were distracted by the air attack, the medical evacuation helicopter flew low and fast toward Morrison's position. Maria guided them to the exact location of the farmhouse where she had left her team. As the helicopter touched down, she jumped out and ran toward the building, Morrison's rifle ready in case of enemy contact. Inside, she found Morrison conscious but weak, with Williams and Chen maintaining defensive positions at the windows. They looked surprised and relieved to see her. "Santos?" Morrison said weakly. "Did you complete the mission?" "Yes, sir. Intelligence delivered, and rescue force en route." The helicopter crew quickly loaded Morrison onto a medical stretcher, while Maria checked his vital signs. His condition had deteriorated since she left, but he was still stable enough for transport. "Williams, Chen, let's go," she called out. As they loaded into the helicopter, enemy fighters began emerging from the tunnel complex, trying to engage the rescue force. But the Apache helicopters provided devastating cover fire, keeping the enemy pinned down while the medical helicopter lifted off. During the flight back to base, Maria worked continuously on Morrison's wounds, monitoring his vital signs and adjusting his IV fluids. Her medical training was finally back in its primary role, saving lives rather than taking them. "How did you get through to the checkpoint?" Williams asked over the helicopter noise. "Very carefully," Maria replied, focused on her patient. Morrison opened his eyes and looked at her with that steady gaze she had come to respect. "Santos, did you really organize that entire rescue operation?" "Sir, I just provided the intelligence. The colonel did the rest." Morrison smiled weakly. "Don't sell yourself short. You saved all our lives today." When they reached the base medical facility, Maria helped transfer Morrison to the emergency room where a surgical team was waiting. As the doctors took over his care, she finally had a moment to process everything that had happened. She had started the mission as a combat medic, trained to save lives and provide medical support. But circumstances had forced her to become something more: a soldier, a leader, and a tactical planner. She had killed enemy fighters, navigated through hostile territory alone, and coordinated a rescue mission that saved her entire team. Colonel Martinez found her in the medical facility waiting area, still wearing her mud-stained uniform and carrying Morrison's rifle. "Santos, the intelligence you provided has already led to a major operation against that enemy stronghold. We estimate your actions may have saved hundreds of American lives. Maria nodded, but her thoughts were on Morrison's condition and the welfare of her team. How's your commander? The colonel asked. The surgeons say he'll make a full recovery. The field surgery I performed probably saved his life. And the others? Williams has a minor shrapnel wound, but he's fine. Chen's leg wound is healing well. They'll both be back to duty within a week. Colonel Martinez studied her for a moment. Santos, I'm recommending you for the Silver Star. What you did out there went far beyond the call of duty. Maria looked down at Morrison's rifle, remembering the weight of command she had carried through the long night. Sir, I was just doing my job. No, the colonel said. You were doing everyone's job. Medic, soldier, leader, tactical planner. That's what makes a great soldier. Later that evening, Maria sat beside Morrison's hospital bed. He was awake and alert, the surgery having been successful. Williams and Chen were in chairs nearby, both men looking tired but grateful to be alive. So, Morrison said, tell me about this rescue mission you organized. Maria described her journey through enemy territory, the infiltration of the village, and the firefight that followed. She told them about finding the abandoned checkpoint and using the backup radio to contact headquarters. And you did all that carrying my rifle? Morrison asked. Yes, sir. It saved my life more than once. Morrison was quiet for a moment. Santos, when I gave you that rifle, I was asking you to become something more than a medic. Looks like you succeeded. Sir, I'm still a medic first. Yes. Morrison agreed. But now you're also a soldier who understands that sometimes saving lives means being willing to take them. 3 weeks later, at a ceremony attended by senior officers and media representatives, Maria stood at attention as Colonel Martinez pinned the Silver Star on her uniform. The citation read, "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action against an enemy force while serving as a combat medic." But for Maria, the real recognition came from Morrison, Williams, and Chen, who were all in the audience despite their recent wounds. They understood better than anyone what she had accomplished during that long night in enemy territory. After the ceremony, Morrison approached her, walking with a slight limp, but otherwise fully recovered. Santos, he said, I've got news for you. I've been offered command of a new special operations medical unit. They want soldiers who can think on their feet and adapt to changing situations. Congratulations, sir. I want you to be my senior medic. The job comes with a promotion to staff sergeant and specialized training in advanced combat medicine. Maria considered the offer. It would mean more responsibility, more dangerous missions, and more situations where she might have to choose between her medical training and her soldier duties. Will I still be a medic first? She asked. Morrison smiled. Always. But you'll also be a soldier who understands that sometimes the best way to save lives is to complete the mission. Maria looked at the Silver Star on her uniform, thinking about the weight of command she had carried through enemy territory. She thought about Morrison's trust in her, Williams's family back home, and Chen's youth and potential. She thought about the intelligence that had prevented countless casualties and the enemy forces that no longer threatened American soldiers. When do I start, sir? Morrison's smile widened. Welcome to the team. Staff Sergeant Santos. 6 months later, Maria stood in the same rocky terrain where her transformation had begun. But this time she was leading her own team of combat medics. They were trained soldiers who understood that saving lives sometimes required taking them. Medics who could carry a rifle as competently as they could carry a medical bag. As they moved through the mountains on their latest mission, Maria carried the same rifle Morrison had given her that night. It had become more than just a weapon. It was a symbol of the trust placed in her and the responsibility she had accepted. Behind her, a young medic named Rodriguez was experiencing his first combat mission. He reminded her of Chen, eager, nervous, and trying to prove himself. Maria made a mental note to keep an eye on him, the way Morrison had watched over her. Staff Sergeant, Rodriguez said quietly, what if we run into more enemies than we can handle? Maria checked her medical supplies, adjusted her rifle, and looked back at the young medic with the same steady gaze Morrison had once given her. Then we do our job, Rodriguez. We save lives, complete the mission, and bring everyone home. As they continued their patrol through the dangerous terrain, Maria carried with her the lessons learned during that long night when she had transformed from medic to soldier to leader. She had learned that sometimes the greatest act of healing was having the courage to fight. And sometimes, the most important mission was simply bringing your people home safely. The rifle felt comfortable in her hands now, as natural as the medical equipment in her pack. She was still a medic first, but she was also a soldier who understood that in combat, there was no difference between saving lives and completing the mission. They were the same thing, and she would carry both responsibilities with equal dedication for as long as she wore the uniform.